Hey, horror fans, before you answer that knock, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment with your city and what time you're watching. This helps YouTube bring you more chilling content like this. Tonight, we're opening the door to 8 true terrifying stories of strangers showing up uninvited, gathered from the creepiest corners of Reddit. From mysterious visitors in the dead of night to people who knocked and didn't wait for an answer, these encounters will leave you questioning every unexpected sound at your front door. So lock your doors, peek through the peephole, and settle in, because sometimes the real horror starts with a knock.
Story number 1: The Endless Knocking from the Void. In the quiet town of Eldridge Hollow, where the old stone houses huddled under a sky heavy with forgotten stars, lived a young woman named Elisa. She had moved there after her parents passed away, seeking peace in the shadows of the ancient hills that seemed to whisper secrets from times long gone. The house she chose was a tall, creaky building with narrow windows like watchful eyes, and a front door carved from dark wood that groaned in the wind. It stood at the end of a winding dirt road, far from the flickering lights of the village, where folks rarely ventured after sunset. Eliza spent her days tending a small garden of wilted roses and reading dusty books about the stars and the vast emptiness beyond them. She believed in the simple things, the warmth of a fire, the song of crickets at dusk, and the safety of locked doors. But one chilly autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged peaks and painted the sky in deep purples and blacks, everything changed. A soft knock echoed through the house, 3 gentle taps that made the floorboards tremble slightly under her feet. Eliza froze in her chair by the hearth, her book slipping from her fingers. Who could it be? No one came this way, especially not at this hour when the nightbirds began their eerie calls. She waited, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. But the knocking came again, a bit louder this time, insistent yet polite, as if the visitor knew she was there and wouldn't leave without an answer. Gathering her courage, Eliza approached the door, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor, and peered through the small peephole. Outside, under the dim glow of a lantern she had hung on the porch, stood a stranger, a tall man in a long, tattered coat that fluttered like shadows in the breeze. His face was pale, almost glowing in the moonlight, with eyes that seemed too wide, too dark, like bottomless wells staring back at her. He knocked again, his knuckles rapping steadily, not hurried, but unending, as if time meant nothing to him. Eliza's mind raced with questions. Was he lost, hurt, or something worse? The town folks had tales of wanderers from the hills, people who vanished into the mist and returned, changed, speaking of lights in the sky that pulled at their souls. She called out, her voice shaky, "Who is it? What do you want?" But the man didn't answer. He just kept knocking, his rhythm perfect, like the ticking of some cosmic clock, counting down to doom. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the knocks growing in her ears, until they drowned out the wind and the distant howl of wolves. Eliza backed away, lighting more candles to chase away the growing darkness that seemed to seep through the cracks in the walls. She remembered an old story her grandmother told, about doors that connected not just to the world outside, but to other places, vast, empty realms where ancient beings drifted, hungry for the warmth of human life. Could this stranger be one of them? A messenger from the stars, knocking to awaken something buried deep in the earth, beneath her home. The house itself felt alive now, the walls breathing in time with the knocks. And Eliza noticed for the first time the strange carvings on the doorframe, symbols like twisted stars and swirling voids that she had always thought were just old decorations. As the knocking continued, 20 minutes turning into 30, she felt a pull in her chest, a whisper in her mind urging her to open the door, to let the stranger in and see what wonders or horrors lay beyond. Downstairs, her neighbor, an old widow named Mrs. Harrow, had heard the noise too. She peeked from her window and saw the man peering into the small panes of glass where Eliza's children might have been, if she had any. But Eliza lived alone, her only company the ghosts of her past. The widow had knocked on Eliza's door earlier that day to warn her of strange lights seen in the hills. Balls of fire dancing like lost souls, but Eliza had brushed it off as superstition. Now, as the knocks persisted, Eliza's fear turned to curiosity, a dangerous spark in the Gothic gloom of her mind. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, its tip glowing faintly from the embers, and approached the door once more. Through the peephole, the man's face seemed closer now, his skin rippling slightly, as if made of water or smoke, and his eyes, whoa, those eyes reflected not the porch light but distant galaxies, swirling with colors no human should see. "Go away," she shouted, but her voice cracked, and the knocking only quickened, matching her heartbeat. The air grew cold, frost forming on the inside of the windows, despite the fire roaring behind her, and Eliza felt the house shift, as if the ground beneath was stirring from a long slumber. In the books she loved, there were warnings about such visitors, harbingers from the cosmos, entities older than time, who knocked on doors to test the veil between worlds, seeking entry to devour the sanity of those who answered. The hills around Eldridge Hollow were said to be riddled with hidden caves, where ancient stones bore the same symbols as her door, places where stargazers had gone mad, babbling about whispers from the void that promised knowledge but delivered only endless night. Eliza's hands trembled as she touched the doorknob, the metal icy and pulsing like a living thing. What if opening it revealed not a man, but a gateway to the stars, where comets screamed and black holes hungered? The knocking swelled to a thunder, shaking the pictures on the walls. Faded portraits of her ancestors who had built this house on land, cursed by forgotten rituals. She thought of running, fleeing to the village, but the road was dark, and the stranger's presence filled the air like a fog, binding her in place. Hours seemed to pass in that frozen moment, the moon climbing higher, casting long shadows that danced like fingers reaching for her. Finally, with a cry of defiance, Eliza flung the door open, the poker raised high. But the porch was empty. The man was gone, vanished like mist in the wind. Yet the knocking didn't stop. It echoed now from inside her head, a rhythmic call from the depths of her soul, awakening visions of vast, uncaring universes where humanity was but a speck. She slammed the door shut, barring it with every lock, but the sound persisted, growing fainter yet eternal, a reminder that some doors, once knocked upon, could never truly be closed. From that night on, Eliza changed. She stared at the stars, with haunted eyes, drawing maps of constellations that didn't exist, whispering to shadows about the stranger who came from the void. The town folks avoided her house, saying it was touched by the Gothic curse of the hills, where cosmic secrets lurked behind every knock. And on quiet nights, when the wind howled through the trees, they swore they could hear it, to the endless, tapping, calling from beyond, waiting for someone foolish enough to answer. Story number 2. The Whispering Shadow at Midnight. In the fog-shrouded village of Blackamoor, nestled deep in a valley where towering pines clawed at stormy skies like skeletal fingers, stood the crumbling manor of Thomas Reed. The house was a Gothic relic, its ivy-choked walls sagging under the weight of centuries, its gargoyles perched on the roof like silent sentinels against the unknown. The windows, tall and narrow, glowed faintly with the flicker of candlelight, as if the manor itself were alive, watching the world through weary eyes. Thomas, a scholar in his late 30s, had inherited the manor from his uncle, a reclusive astronomer who vanished one stormy night after claiming to hear voices from the stars. The front door, massive and bound with iron, bore faint etchings of celestial map stars, aligned in patterns that seemed to shift when viewed too long, making Thomas's head ache with a strange tugging sensation. He spent his evenings in the study, surrounded by shelves of forbidden tomes bound in cracked leather, their pages filled with cryptic notes about the outer darkness and the entities that dwelled there, beyond the veil of human understanding. Blackamoor's villagers avoided the manor, whispering of its curse, of nights when lights danced in the sky and left madness in their wake. Thomas, a man of logic, dismissed such tales as superstition, though he couldn't shake the unease that settled in his bones each time he traced the door's carvings with his fingers. One fateful midnight, as thunder rumbled like the growl of some colossal beast and lightning slashed across the heavens, a frantic knocking shattered the silence of the manor. Thomas, seated at his desk, with a quill in hand, jolted upright, ink spilling like black blood across the parchment where he'd been transcribing a passage about cosmic voids. The knocks were aggressive, pounding in a rhythm that seemed to echo the storm's fury, reverberating through the empty halls where portraits of stern ancestors glared from shadowed frames. Each thump shook the floorboards, as if the door itself protested the intrusion. Thomas set down his quill, his heart thudding against his ribs, and lit a lantern, its flame casting long, twisting shadows that danced like living things across the walls. He crept toward the grand staircase, the air growing colder with each step, the manor's creaks blending with the storm's howls. The knocking continued, relentless, a demand that refused to be ignored. Through the stained-glass window beside the door, its colors muted by the night, Thomas glimpsed a shadowy figure, a man in a drenched coat, the brim of his hat pulled low, obscuring his face. The figure stood unnaturally still between knocks, as if time held no sway over him, his silhouette framed by flashes of lightning that revealed no details, only a void-like presence. "Who's there?" Thomas called, his voice trembling despite his effort to sound firm. The storm swallowed his words, and no answer came, only the pounding, now slower but heavier, each knock vibrating through the manor's bones. Thomas's mind raced with fragments of the books he'd studied, tales of cosmic travelers, beings from distant voids who wore human forms like ill-fitting masks, knocking on doors to test the barriers between worlds. Blackamoor's folklore was rich with such stories, wanderers who appeared in storms, their eyes glowing with starlight, leading the unwary into the woods where ancient altars stood hidden beneath moss and shadow. Thomas had always scoffed at these tales, but now, with the knocks echoing like a heartbeat, doubt crept in. He approached the door, his lantern held high, the light glinting off the iron bolts and the carved stars that seemed to pulse faintly. Through the window, the figure shifted, its head tilting as if sensing Thomas's presence, though no face was visible, only darkness beneath the hat's brim. The knocking quickened, matching the rhythm of Thomas's pulse, and he felt a strange pull, a whisper in his ear, like wind through cracked stone, urging him to turn the handle and face the mystery. He pressed his eye to the keyhole, heart pounding, and saw the figure more clearly, or so he thought. The man's coat seemed to ripple, not with the wind, but as if made of liquid shadow, flowing in patterns that mimicked the carvings on the door. His hands, pale and long-fingered, moved with unnatural precision, each knock deliberate, like a ritual. Thomas's breath caught as he noticed the ground beneath the stranger's feet. The wet stone of the porch was untouched. No footprints in the mud, no trace of the rain that should have soaked him. The scholar's rational mind screamed to bolt the door tighter, to retreat to the safety of his study, but the whisper grew louder, a voice not his own, weaving through his thoughts. "Open the door. See the truth? Know the stars." It was soft, almost seductive, promising secrets hidden in the vast emptiness beyond the sky. Thomas's hand hovered over the bolt, trembling, as memories of his uncle's journal flooded back scribbled warnings about the knockers from the void, beings who sought entry not to homes but to minds. planting seeds of cosmic knowledge that bloomed into madness. The manor groaned, as if in warning, its timber straining under some unseen weight. Thomas backed away, clutching the lantern so tightly his knuckles whitened. The knocking grew louder, shaking the walls, dislodging dust from the rafters that swirled in the lantern's glow like tiny galaxies. He stumbled back to his study, slamming the door behind him, but the sound followed, echoing in his skull, a relentless tattoo that drowned out the storm. He rifled through his uncle's journal, pages yellowed and brittle, finding a passage that chilled his blood. They come when the heavens rage, knocking to be let in. Do not answer, for their gifts are poison, their faces stolen, their purpose to unravel the soul. Thomas's eyes darted to the window, where lightning revealed the figure still standing, now closer, his hat pressed against the glass, as if trying to peer inside. The scholar's breath hitched. The figure's face, briefly illuminated, was not human but a shifting mask of shadows. Eyes like black holes, swallowing light, mouth a slash of nothingness that seemed to smile. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes' time, blurred in the manor's oppressive air. Thomas lit every candle in the study, their flames trembling as if afraid, and barricaded the door with a heavy oaked chair. The knocking never ceased, growing softer at times, then surging with force, as if testing the manor's resolve. The whisper in his mind grew clearer, forming words in a language he didn't know yet understood, promises of infinite knowledge, of seeing the universe's birth and death, of joining the eternal dance of stars. But with each promise came a vision, flashes of vast, empty spaces where planets crumbled into dust, where beings of shadow and light writhed in endless hunger. Thomas clutched his head, trying to silence the voice, but it was as if the stranger's knocks were hammering directly into his soul, cracking the walls of his sanity. He remembered a tale from Blackamoor's elders, told in hushed tones at the village inn, a farmer who opened his door to a stranger in a storm, only to vanish, his home found empty save for carvings of stars scratched into every surface. Thomas glanced at the manor's walls, half expecting to see such marks, but they remained bare, though the air felt charged, heavy with the scent of ozone and something older, like the breath of forgotten gods. He dragged a bookshelf across the study door, its weight screeching against the floor, and sank into his chair, the journal open on his lap. The knocking slowed, each tap deliberate, as if the stranger were savoring the weight, knowing Thomas's resolve was fraying. The scholar's eyes fell on a sketch in the journal, a crude drawing of a door, its frame lined with symbols like those on his own, and above it, a single phrase, "The threshold must hold." Desperate, Thomas searched the study for answers, pulling books from shelves, their pages spilling secrets of ancient rituals to seal doorways against the unseen. He found a passage about salt and iron, old protections against spirits, and scrambled together what he could: a rusted dagger from a display case, a sack of salt from the kitchen. He poured a shaky line across the threshold, muttering prayers he didn't believe in, and drove the dagger into the doorframe, its blade sinking into the wood as if it belonged there. The knocking paused, and for a moment Thomas dared to hope, but then it resumed, softer, almost mocking, accompanied by a low hum that vibrated through the manor's stones, like the pulse of a distant star. Dawn approached, the storm's fury fading to a drizzle, and Thomas, exhausted, peered through the window. The figure was gone, leaving only a puddle of black water on the porch, shimmering with flecks of light like trapped stars. The knocking stopped, but the silence was worse, heavy with the weight of what had been invited. Thomas returned to the door, his hands shaking as he touched the carvings, now warm under his fingers, as if alive. He found scratches on the outside, deep gouges forming a pattern, a constellation he recognized from his uncle's notes, one that marked a place in the sky where no stars shone, only darkness deeper than night. In the days that followed, Thomas became a shadow of himself, his eyes haunted, his sleep broken by whispers that spoke of cosmic truths too vast for a human mind. He boarded the windows, rarely left the manor, and spent hours staring at the door, waiting for the next knock. The villagers noticed the change, whispering that the manor's curse had claimed another soul. On quiet nights, when the wind carried the scent of rain, they swore they heard it too, a faint tapping, not from the manor, but from the sky itself, as if the stars were knocking, calling Thomas to join them in the Gothic void. The manor stood silent, its door unopened, but the scholar knew some thresholds, once crossed by a single knock, could never be sealed again, and the shadow that came, that midnight, lingered in his soul, whispering forever of the endless dark. Story number 3. The Distressed Wanderer, from the stars in the desolate outskirts of Raven's End, where Gothic spires of abandoned churches pierced an eternal twilight, and the ground was soft with the bones of forgotten graves. Sarah lived alone in a modest cottage, overgrown with thorny vines. The cottage sat at the edge of a windswept moor, its walls weathered by storms that howled down from the jagged hills, carrying whispers of secrets older than the earth itself. Sarah, a widow in her early 40s, had moved there after her husband's death, seeking solitude in a place where the world's noise couldn't reach her. Her front door, simple oak with a brass knocker shaped like a comet, was a relic from her late husband, Elias, an amateur astronomer who spoke of lights in the sky that moved with purpose, as if alive. The knocker gleamed faintly under the moon, its curves catching the light in ways that sometimes made Sarah pause, wondering if it was more than mere decoration. She spent her days tending a small herb garden and knitting by the fire, her evenings lost in Elias's old star charts, which she studied not for science but for comfort, a way to feel him near. The villagers of Raven's End rarely visited, their eyes wary when they spoke of the more muttering tales of wanderers who appeared in the night, their forms human but their souls tied to the stars. One bitter winter night, as snow fell like silent screams from a sky heavy with clouds, a soft knocking woke Sarah from a fitful sleep. The sound was gentle but insistent, 3 taps followed by a pause, then 3 more, echoing through the cottage like ripples in a still pond. She sat up in bed, her breath visible in the chilly air, her heart thudding against her ribs. The fire in the hearth had died to embers, casting a faint red glow that barely reached the walls. Wrapping herself in a thick wool shawl, Sarah tiptoed across the creaking floorboards, the cold biting at her bare feet. The knocking came again, sharper now, and with it a voice, faint and trembling. "Please, help me. I'm lost." It was a woman's voice, young and desperate, carrying a note of fear that tugged at Sarah's heart. She hesitated at the door, her hand hovering over the bolt, memories of Elias's warnings flooding back his late-night ramblings about visitors from the beyond, who knocked on doors to steal warmth and life. But the voice called again. "Please, I've been attacked. I need to use your phone," and Sarah's compassion, honed by years of loss, overrode her fear. Peering through the small window beside the door, Sarah saw a figure in the moonlight, a young woman, no older than 20, shivering in a thin white robe that clung to her like damp gauze. Her hair was wrapped in a towel, dripping wet despite the snow, and her slippers were caked with mud, as if she'd wandered far across the moor. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with tears streaking down her cheeks, but her eyes held a strange gleam, like starlight caught in glass, unnatural and piercing. Sarah's breath caught. The woman smelled not of earth or rain, but of something sharp, like the air after a lightning strike, a scent of ozone and vast emptiness. The widow's instincts screamed to keep the door locked, to turn away, but the woman's pleas grew louder, her knocks more frantic, and Sarah couldn't bear the thought of leaving someone to freeze in the night. "Just a moment," she called, her voice shaky, and unbolted the door. The comet-shaped knocker glinting as it swung open. The woman stumbled inside, her robe dripping water that sparkled oddly on the floor, like tiny flecks of stardust. "Thank you," she gasped, clutching her arms, as if to hold herself together. I was in the woods. Something chased me. Shadows, they weren't human. Her words tumbled out, disjointed, and Sarah guided her to the hearth, rekindling the fire. With trembling hands, she offered a blanket and a cup of tea. But the woman's eyes darted around the cottage, lingering on the star charts pinned to the walls, as if recognizing something in their patterns. Sarah tried to calm her, asking her name, but the woman only murmured Lila, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might shatter her. The fire's warmth did little to ease the chill that settled in the room, and Sarah noticed frost forming on the windows, intricate patterns like fractal galaxies spiraling inward. Despite the growing flames, as Lila sipped the tea, her story unraveled into something stranger. I fell, she said, her eyes fixed on the fire. From up there, she pointed upward, not at the ceiling, but beyond, to the sky hidden by clouds. They sent me here, but I don't know why. They're watching, always watching. Her words carried a weight that made Sarah's skin prickle, evoking tales from Raven's End about beings from the cosmos who wore human skins to walk among mortals, knocking on doors to find vessels for their ancient minds. Elias had spoken of such things, scribbling in his journals about starborn wanderers who crossed the void to test the living, their presence marked by a cold that seeped into the soul. Sarah tried to dismiss it as the ramblings of a frightened girl, but Lila's eyes, those gleaming, bottomless eyes, seemed to hold the weight of countless stars, and her robe, now dry, shimmered faintly, as if woven from light rather than cloth. The cottage grew colder. The fires crackled, dimming as if suffocated by an unseen force. Sarah's questions where Lila came from, who attacked her, went unanswered, replaced by whispers of falling through darkness, of voices in the stars that sang of creation and destruction. They need someone, Lila said, her voice now steady, almost hypnotic. Someone to carry their light, to open the way. Sarah's heart raced. The woman's words felt like a hook in her mind, pulling at memories, not her own visions of endless voids, where comets screamed and black holes pulsed with hunger. The widow stood, backing toward the door, her hands fumbling for the iron poker, by the hearth. You should rest, she said, forcing a smile, but Lila's gaze followed her, unblinking, and the air grew heavy, as if the cottage itself were holding its breath. The knocking resumed, not from the door, but from the walls, a faint tapping that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, matching the rhythm of Sarah's pulse. Lila didn't seem to notice, her eyes now fixed on the comet knocker, which gleamed brighter than it should, its brass reflecting colors not found in the firelight blues and purples of distant nebulas. Sarah's fear deepened. She remembered Elias's last journal entry, written in a trembling hand. The comet is a key, a signal. When it knocks, do not answer, for it opens doors to places we were never meant to see. She clutched the poker, her knuckles white, and asked Lila to leave, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. But Lila only smiled, a smile that stretched too wide, her teeth glinting like stars in a void. You've already let me in, she said, and the words carried a finality that made Sarah's blood run cold. The fire sputtered, casting shadows that twisted into shapes, eyes forms that defied geometry. Sarah's mind reeled, caught between the urge to flee and the strange pull of Lila's voice, which now spoke in her head, not her ears. Open the door again, let them through. The widow staggered to the door, not to obey, but to escape, flinging it open to the snowy night. But Lila was already there, standing on the threshold, though Sarah hadn't seen her move. Her robe was gone, replaced by a shimmering veil of light, her body translucent, revealing a core of swirling stars within. We're so lonely, Lila whispered, her voice a chorus of countless others, echoing from the depths of space. Sarah slammed the door, barring it with every lock, but the tapping grew louder, now inside the cottage, coming from the walls, the floor, even the star charts. which rustled as if alive. She grabbed Elias's journal, flipping to a page about protective wards, symbols to seal thresholds against the unknown. With shaking hands, she scratched a circle of salt around herself, muttering words from the journal, half-remembered prayers to gods she didn't know. The tapping slowed, but Lila's presence lingered, her form flickering in and out of sight. Sometimes at the window, sometimes by the fire, her eyes always watching. Sarah's vision blurred with images of cosmic landscapes, planets crumbling, skies alive with writhing shapes, a void that hungered for her soul. She clutched the comet knocker, ripped from the door in a moment of panic, and hurled it into the fire, where it hissed and sparked, releasing a smell like burning stars. Lila's form wavered, her scream a soundless wail that shook the cottage, and then she was gone, leaving only a trail of glittering dust on the floor, like the remnants of a dying galaxy. Dawn broke, the snow ceasing, and the cottage fell silent. But Sarah knew the quiet was a lie. The frost on the windows had formed new patterns, maps of constellations she'd never seen, and the air held a faint hum, like the distant pulse of a star. She burned the star charts, boarded the windows, and avoided the door, but the tapping returned in her dreams, soft and persistent, accompanied by Lila's voice whispering of the wonders and terrors beyond. The villagers noticed Sarah's change, her haunted eyes, her refusal to leave the cottage, and spoke of her as cursed, touched by the moor's ancient secrets. On still nights, when the moon hung low, they heard faint knocks from the direction of her home, not from the door, but from the sky, as if the stars themselves were calling her to join them. Sarah lived on, a prisoner in her own cottage, knowing that the distressed wanderer from the stars had left something behind, a piece of the void that lingered in her soul, waiting for the next knock to set it free. Asterisk. Story number 4. The pizza delivery from the abyssing the sleepy hamlet of Shadowbrook, cradled by dense forests where moonlight struggled to pierce the canopy, and old mansions sagged under the weight of their Gothic secrets. Jack and his family lived in a cozy but isolated home at the end of a gravel lane. The house, with its steeply pitched roof and narrow windows, stood alone, surrounded by whispering pines that seemed to guard it from the world. Its front door, painted red like fresh blood, was sturdy oak, its iron hinges creaking with every gust of wind. Jack, a carpenter in his mid-40s, his wife, Martha, and their 2 children, Lily and Ben, had moved there to escape the city's clamor, seeking a quiet life where the stars shone bright and the nights were still. The villagers of Shadowbrook, though friendly, kept their distance, sharing tales over pints at the local tavern about the forest's strangeness, lights that danced among the trees, voices that called from nowhere, and strangers who appeared only to vanish by dawn. Jack laughed off such stories, his practical mind dismissing them as folklore, but he kept a shotgun by the door, just in case the wilds held more than bears or wolves. One sweltering summer midnight, as crickets chirped a restless lullaby, and the family slumbered under the hum of a ceiling fan, a sharp knock jolted Jack awake. The sound was crisp, deliberate, cutting through the sticky air like a blade. 3 raps. Pause. 3 more. He sat up, sweat beating on his brow, his heart thumping as the knock came again, louder, insistent. Martha stirred beside him, her eyes wide in the dark. "Who's that?" she whispered, clutching the quilt. Jack shrugged, unease creeping up his spine, and padded to the window, parting the curtains to peer out. Under the porch light's dim glow stood a man in a faded delivery cap, holding a pizza box that steamed faintly in the cool night air. His face was shadowed, but his smile gleamed, too wide, teeth catching the light like polished stones. "Delivery," the man called, his voice oddly cheerful, carrying a hollow ring that made Jack's skin prickle. The family hadn't ordered pizza, not that night or any night since moving to Shadowbrook, where the nearest pizzeria was 30 miles away in a town that closed by 9. Jack glanced at the driveway. No car, no bicycle, Just the man standing alone, his coat too heavy for summer, its edges fraying like smoke. "Wrong house," Jack called through the door, his voice steady but firm. The man didn't move, just knocked again, the pizza box held high like an offering. "Got your order right here," he said, his tone unchanged, as if he hadn't heard. Martha joined Jack, her hand on his arm, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't open it, Jack. Something's not right." She'd heard the village tale stories of mimics from the cosmic dark, beings that took familiar forms to trick their way past thresholds, seeking to feed on the warmth of human lives. Jack nodded, his jaw tight, but the knocking persisted, each rap shaking the doorframe, the sound burrowing into his head like a worm. He checked the lock, then grabbed the shotgun. Its weight a small comfort against the growing dread. Through the peephole, Jack studied the man. His cap was tilted, hiding his eyes, but his smile stretched wider, almost splitting his face, and his hands moved with unnatural precision, knocking in a rhythm that felt rehearsed, like a signal. The pizza box, plain white with no logo, seemed to glow faintly, its edges shimmering as if dusted with starlight. Jack's stomach churned. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of dough, and something else metallic, like blood or the tang of a struck meteor. "We didn't order anything," Jack shouted, his voice cracking. "Leave." The man's smile didn't falter, but he tilted his head, as if listening to something far off, and knocked again, slower. Each thud vibrating through the house, rattling the windows, and waking the children upstairs. Lily's voice called out, scared, and Ben's footsteps thumped as he ran to his parents' room. But Jack kept his eyes on the stranger, who now stood closer to the door, though Jack hadn't seen him move. Martha lit a lantern, its flame flickering as if afraid, and whispered about an old Shadowbrook legend, a delivery man who appeared in the dead of night, offering gifts that weren't what they seemed, his presence tied to the forest's ancient stones, where carvings of stars marked altars to forgotten gods. Jack shook his head, trying to stay grounded, but the knocking grew louder, the rhythm syncing with his heartbeat, and he felt a pull, a whisper in his mind urging him to open the door, to accept the delivery, and see what lay inside the box. The children huddled behind Martha, their eyes wide, and Jack noticed the wall's old wood panels etched with faint lines he'd always thought were scratches beginning to glow, forming patterns like constellations that pulsed with each knock. The house felt alive, its air charged, as if the stranger's presence was awakening something buried beneath the floorboards. Jack cracked the door an inch. The shotgun aimed and barked, "Show me your face." The man tilted his head up, and Jack froze. His eyes were voids, black and endless, reflecting not the porch light but distant galaxies, swirling with colors no human should see. His smile widened, lips parting to reveal teeth that shimmered like shards of a broken star. "Pizza's getting cold," he said, his voice now a chorus, layered with tones that echoed from nowhere, as if the forest itself spoke through him. Jack slammed the door, bolting it, but the knocking resumed, faster, shaking the walls until dust fell like ash. Martha grabbed a knife from the kitchen, her hands trembling, and whispered a prayer her grandmother taught her, one for warding off spirits. The children clung to her, their whimpers drowned by the relentless pounding, which now came from all sides, door, windows, even the roof, as if the stranger had multiplied. Surrounding the house, Jack dragged a table to barricade the door, his mind racing with fragments of the village tales beings from the abyss, cosmic predators who mimicked human roles to cross thresholds, their gifts a lure to unravel souls. The pizza box, still visible through the window, steamed impossibly, its glow brighter, casting shadows that writhed like tentacles across the porch. The air grew cold, frost creeping up the windows in spirals that mimicked the carvings on the walls, and Jack felt his thoughts fraying, tugged by visions of vast, empty spaces where stars screamed and darkness hungered. "Stay back," he yelled, raising the shotgun, but the man's voice came through the door, soft and insistent. "Just take the box. It's for you." The words carried a weight, a promise of knowledge and terror, and Jack's hand twitched toward the bolt. Drawn by a curiosity he couldn't explain, hours dragged on, the knocking a constant drumbeat. The family huddled in the living room, the lantern's light dimming as if suffocated. Jack found an old book in a trunk, a journal from the house's first owner, a recluse who wrote of offerings from the void that came in familiar guises, seeking entry to anchor their essence in the world. The journal warned of that, once opened, let in more than flesh, connecting to realms where time and space twisted into knots. Jack clutched the book, his eyes darting to the door, where the carvings now glowed brighter, their lines shifting into new patterns, like a map to nowhere. He poured salt across the threshold, a trick from Martha's grandmother, and nailed iron horseshoes above the door, hoping old protections would hold. The knocking slowed, each tap deliberate, as if the stranger were testing their resolve, waiting for a crack in their fear. Dawn crept over the horizon, the sky lightening to a dull gray, and the knocking stopped, leaving a silence that pressed against Jack's ears. He peered out, shotgun ready, and saw the porch empty. No man, no footprints, only the pizza box, sitting alone, its glow faded but still steaming faintly. Martha begged him not to touch it, but Jack, driven by a need to understand, cracked the door and nudged the box with the shotgun's barrel. It felt heavy, unnaturally so, and when he lifted the lid, he found not pizza, but a void black, endless, swirling with pinpricks of light like distant stars. A note lay inside, scrawled in ink that shimmered like liquid night, its symbols unrecognizable, but pulsing with meaning. A map, a warning, a summons. Jack slammed the box shut, his hands shaking, and burned it in the backyard. The flames flaring blue and green, the smoke curling into shapes that hurt his eyes to watch. The family never spoke of that night, but the house changed. The carvings on the walls stayed faintly lit, visible only in the dark, and the air held a hum, like the echo of a cosmic pulse. Jack kept the shotgun loaded. Martha prayed nightly, and the children avoided the windows, where frost patterns lingered even in summer. The villagers noticed the family's silence, their haunted eyes, and whispered that the forest's curse had found them. On quiet nights, when the pines swayed, Jack heard faint knocks not from the door, but from within his mind, a reminder that some deliveries brought not food, but glimpses of the abyss. The red door stood unopened, but the family knew the stranger's gift had crossed the threshold, leaving a piece of the void that waited, patient and eternal, for the next knock to set it free. Story number 5. The Housekeeping Phantom in the labyrinthine streets of Nocturne City, where gas lamps flickered over cobblestone paths and towering Gothic edifices loomed like silent giants. Clara lived in a small, fourth-floor apartment with a door that always stuck, as if reluctant to open to the world outside. The building, an old tenement with cracked plaster walls and spiraling staircases, creaked with the weight of its history, its shadows thick with whispers of forgotten tenants. Clara, a seamstress in her late 30s, had moved there after losing her job in a brighter part of the city, drawn to the cheap rent and the solitude that let her stitch in peace. Her door, painted a faded green, bore a brass knocker shaped like a crescent moon, a quirky touch from a previous occupant who loved the night sky. Clara spent her days sewing dresses for wealthy clients, her nights reading Gothic novels by candlelight, their tales of haunted manors and spectral visitors, a thrilling escape from her quiet life. The neighbors, a mix of old widows and young artists, kept to themselves, but they shared stories of Nocturne City's darker side, tales of figures who roamed the streets after midnight, knocking on doors with promises that hid terrible truths. One chilly autumn night, at precisely 4 a.m, a sharp voice pierced the silence of Clara's apartment. Housekeeping. It was a woman's voice, crisp and professional, followed by 3 firm knocks on the door. Clara jolted awake, her book tumbling to the floor, the candle on her bedside table flickering as if startled. The knocks came again, steady and deliberate. And the voice repeated, "Housekeeping." With a faint edge of impatience, Clara's heart raced. The building had no cleaning staff, and no one visited at such an hour, especially not in Nocturne City, where the streets grew eerily quiet after midnight. She slipped out of bed, her nightgown brushing the cold wooden floor, and crept to the door, her breath shallow. The voice muttered something now, low and angry, words Clara couldn't catch but that sent a chill down her spine, like the growl of a storm gathering far off. She pressed her eye to the peephole, expecting to see a tired worker or a prankster. But the hallway was empty, lit only by the dim flicker of a gas lamp that cast long, twisting shadows. The knocking resumed, louder, the door rattling in its frame, and Clara backed away, clutching the iron scissors she kept on her sewing table. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling but firm. No answer came, only the voice again, "Housekeeping. Open the door." The tone was sharper now, almost commanding, and Clara felt a strange pull, a whisper in her mind urging her to obey, to let the visitor in and see what they wanted. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog, and checked the peephole against heel. Nothing, just the empty hall, but the shadows seemed to shift, forming shapes that looked like hands reaching for the door. Nocturne City's legends flooded her thoughts, stories of spectral cleaners, beings from beyond, who knocked on doors under guises of service, their true purpose to tidy not homes but souls, sweeping them into the void. Clara had laughed at such tales, but now, with the knocks echoing like a heartbeat, fear took root. She lit another candle, its flame wavering as if caught in a draught, and checked the locks, 2 bolts and a chain, all secure. The knocking grew, relentless, each rap shaking the apartment, dislodging dust from the ceiling that glittered in the candlelight like tiny stars. Clara's eyes darted to the walls, where old wallpaper peeled to reveal faint etching symbols like swirling galaxies, unnoticed until now, glowing faintly with each knock. The air grew cold, heavy with the scent of ozone and something ancient, like the breath of a forgotten crypt. She grabbed a shawl, wrapping it tight, and paced the small room, her mind racing. The voice called again, "Housekeeping." But now it was layered, as if many voices spoke at once, some soft, some harsh, all urging her to open the door. Clara's thoughts blurred with visions, black skies filled with writhing shapes, stars that pulsed like eyes, a void that whispered her name. She remembered a story from her neighbor, old Mrs. Vance, about a tenant who answered a midnight knock and vanished, their apartment found empty save for a pile of dust that sparkled under moonlight. Clara had dismissed it as superstition, but now she wondered. She rummaged through a drawer, finding a small iron cross her mother had given her, a charm against evil, and hung it on the door, muttering a prayer she barely remembered. The knocking paused, and for a moment, silence blanketed the apartment. But then it resumed, softer, almost mocking, as if the visitor knew her defenses were frail. Clara's gaze fell on a dusty book she'd bought at a market stall, a collection of Nocturne City folklore, and she flipped through it, hands trembling. A passage caught her eye. The cleaners come from the stars, their knocks a summons to join their endless task. Do not answer, for their brooms sweep souls into the dark. The apartment shook, the knocking now coming from the walls, the ceiling, even the floor, as if the visitor had slipped inside the building's bones. Clara's candles flickered, some snuffing out, and the shadows grew, stretching into forms that seemed to watch her, thin figures with eyes like voids. She poured a line of salt across the threshold, a trick from the book, and clutched the cross, her knuckles white. The voice grew louder, "Housekeeping, let me in," and Clara felt her resolve waver, the whisper in her mind promising peace, knowledge, a place among the stars. She staggered to the door, scissors raised, and shouted, "Go away." The words felt hollow, swallowed by the hum that filled the air, a vibration like the pulse of a distant galaxy, dot through the peephole. Clara saw a woman in a gray uniform, her face obscured by a veil of shadow, her hands holding a broom that gleamed like polished bone. The figure vanished when Clara blinked, but the knocking intensified, the door creaking as if pushed by unseen hands. She backed to the center of the room, the salt circle her only shield, and noticed the floorboards, old and worn now etched with the same galactic symbols as the walls, glowing brighter, as if the apartment itself were waking. The book mentioned a ritual, a way to seal thresholds with words and iron, and Clara, desperate, scratched a symbol from the page onto the door with her scissors, chanting a half-remembered rhyme. The knocking slowed, the voice fading to a murmur, but the air grew heavier, pressing against her chest, and the shadows danced closer, their forms more solid, their eyes glinting with starlight. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes' time, twisted, in the apartment's oppressive air. Clara sat in her salt circle, the cross clutched to her chest, the candles nearly spent. The knocking became a faint tap, like a heartbeat fading, but the whisper in her mind grew clearer, speaking of cosmic tasks, of cleaning worlds by unmaking them, of joining an eternal order that swept away the chaos of life. She fought it, humming old songs to drown the voice, but her thoughts filled with images, planets crumbling to dust, skies alive with endless brooms, a void that welcomed her with open arms. The apartment's walls seemed to breathe, the symbols pulsing in time with the taps, and Clara felt her sanity fray, tugged toward a truth too vast to hold. Dawn broke, its gray light seeping through the curtains, and the knocking stopped, leaving a silence that felt alive, watchful. Clara crept to the door, her scissors ready, and peered out. The hallway was empty, but a pile of dust lay on the threshold, sparkling like crushed stars. She swept it away, her hands shaking, and found a single object beneath a small, bone-white key etched with the same symbols as her walls. She burned it in the sink, the flames flaring blue, the smoke curling into shapes that hurt her eyes. The apartment returned to normal, the symbols fading, but Clara knew it was a lie. The air held a hum, like the echo of a cosmic broom, and the shadows lingered, watching from corners. She avoided the door, kept the cross close, and stopped sewing, her hands too unsteady. The neighbors noticed her change her haunted eyes, her whispered prayers, and spoke of her as touched by nocturne city's curse. On quiet nights, when the gas lamps flickered, Clara heard faint taps, not from the door but from within her mind, a reminder that the housekeeping phantom had left, a piece of the void, waiting for her to open the door again and join its endless task. Story number 6, The Geotagged Ghost High in the misty mountains of Etheridge Peak, where ancient crags pierced the clouds and Gothic caves hid secrets older than the stones themselves. Samuel lived in a sturdy log cabin perched on a windswept ridge. The cabin, built with his own hands, had thick pine walls and a heavy oak door etched with protective runes, symbols his grandfather, a local hermit, had insisted would keep evil at bay. Samuel, a hiker and cartographer in his early 30s, had chosen this solitude to map the uncharted trails of the peaks, drawn to their wild beauty and the whispers of mystery that clung to the fog. His door faced the valley below, where the lights of Etheridge village flickered like distant stars, a place he visited only for supplies, avoiding the locals' tales of spectral wanderers who roamed the mountains, their knocks echoing from nowhere. Samuel preferred fax maps, compasses, the solid earth beneath his boots, but the runes on his door, glowing faintly under moonlight, always gave him pause, as if they knew something he didn't. One crisp autumn night, as a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the peaks in a ghostly shroud, a sharp knock rattled Samuel's door. The sound was sudden, 3 deliberate raps that cut through the wind's low moan, startling him from his work charting a new trail. His lantern flickered, casting jagged shadows across the cabin's walls, where maps hung like tapestries, their lines tracing paths through the mountain's heart. The knock came again, slower, heavier, as if testing the door's strength, and Samuel's heart thudded, his hand reaching for the hunting knife on his desk. No one climbed this high at night. The trails were treacherous, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. He crept to the door, his boots silent on the pine floor, and peered through the peephole. The porch was empty, the fog swirling like a living thing, but the runes on the door glowed brighter, pulsing with each knock, as if awakened by an unseen presence. "Who's there?" Samuel called, his voice steady but tight. No answer came. Only another knock, this time accompanied by a faint hum, like the vibration of a tuning fork buried deep in the earth. He checked the peephole again, seeing nothing but fog, yet the door trembled slightly, as if pushed by an invisible hand. Etheridge Peak's legends flooded his mind, stories of geotagged ghosts, spirits from other realms who left no footprints but marked their presence with knocks, their essence tied to the mountain's ancient stones, where carvings of stars and voids hinted at cosmic doorways. Samuel had scoffed at such tales, but now, with the knocking growing louder, the cabin felt smaller, its walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of ozone and something colder, like the breath of a frozen void. He lit another lantern, its flame wavering as if afraid, and checked the lock's 2 heavy bolts and a bar, all secure. The knocking persisted, moving from the door to the windows, then the walls, a rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from everywhere, syncing with Samuel's pulse. He grabbed his grandfather's journal, a leather-bound book filled with cryptic notes about the peaks, and flipped to a passage he'd once ignored. "They knock without form, travelers from the stars, seeking entry to anchor their light. The runes hold them back, but only if the heart is strong." Samuel's eyes darted to the door, where the runes now burned with a faint blue glow, their lines twisting into patterns he didn't recognize, like a map to a place beyond the sky. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the floorboards, and he felt a whisper in his mind, not words, but a pull, urging him to open the door and face the unknown. Samuel backed away, clutching the knife, his breath shallow. The cabin's maps rustled, their lines seeming to shift, forming constellations that pulsed in time with the knocks. He remembered a tale from the village tavern, told by an old miner, a hiker who answered a midnight knock and vanished, his cabin found empty, save for scratches on the walls, marks that formed a star chart pointing to a void where no stars shone. Samuel's hands trembled as he poured a circle of salt around himself, a trick his grandfather swore by, and traced a rune from the journal onto the floor with his knife, muttering words he barely understood. The knocking paused, and for a moment, silence gripped the cabin, but then it resumed, softer, almost teasing. As if the visitor knew his fear was a crack in his defenses, he approached the door again, drawn by a curiosity he couldn't shake, and cracked it open, the knife raised. The fog swirled thicker, but no figure stood on the porch, only a faint glow in the air, like a wisp of starlight. The hum intensified, and Samuel's vision blurred with flashes of cosmic vistas, black skies filled with writhing shapes, planets crumbling into dust, a void that pulsed with hunger. He slammed the door, the runes flaring bright, and stumbled back, his heart racing. The knocking grew frantic, shaking the cabin, dislodging stones from the fireplace that rolled like eyes across the floor. Samuel's mind reeled, caught between the urge to flee and the whisper's promise of knowledge, of seeing the universe's secrets laid bare. He grabbed a rusted iron horseshoe from a shelf, another of his grandfather's charms, and nailed it above the door, the hammer strikes drowning out the knocks for a moment. The night stretched on, the fog pressing against the windows, which frosted over with patterns like fractal galaxies, spiraling inward. Samuel sat in his salt circle, the journal open on his lap, reading warnings of geotagged spirits, who marked thresholds with their knocks, seeking to bind human souls to their endless journey. The cabin's walls seemed to breathe, the maps glowing faintly, their lines now tracing paths not through mountains but through stars, leading to a darkness that felt alive. The knocking shifted, coming from beneath the floor, as if the visitor had slipped into the earth itself, and Samuel felt his thoughts unravel, tugged by visions of endless voids where comets screamed and shadows danced. He chanted the journals, runes, his voice hoarse, and drove the knife into the floor. Anchoring the symbol he'd drawn, dawn crept over the peaks, the fog thinning to reveal a pale sky, and the knocking stopped, leaving a silence that felt heavy, watchful. Samuel peered out, the knife still in hand, and saw the porch empty. But the ground was marked with faint scratches, forming a constellation that matched the one in his visions, a map to nowhere. He burned the journal, fearing its secrets, and scattered the salt, but the cabin felt changed, its air humming with a faint pulse, like the echo of a distant star. The runes on the door stayed lit, visible even in daylight, and Samuel avoided them. His hikes abandoned, his maps untouched. The villagers noticed his change, his haunted eyes, his whispered chants, and spoke of him as cursed, touched by the peak's ancient magic. On still nights, when the fog rolled in, Samuel heard faint taps, not from the door, but from within his mind. A reminder that the geotagged ghost had left a mark, a piece of the void that lingered, waiting for the next knock to set it free. Asterisk. Story number 7, The Cookie Seller from Beyond Dat, the Edge of Whispering Woods. Where ancient trees formed Gothic arches under a canopy that blocked the stars, Elias lived in a sturdy farmhouse, with a door that creaked like distant laughter. The house, built by his great-grandfather, stood alone in a clearing, its weathered stone walls wrapped in ivy that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Elias, a farmer in his late 40s, tilled the soil and tended his livestock with a quiet pride, his days filled with the rhythm of the earth, his nights spent by a crackling fire with his 2 dogs, Rusty and Belle, curled at his feet. The door, painted a deep brown, bore a simple iron knocker shaped like a wheat sheaf, a nod to the land's bounty. Whispering Woods was a place of eerie beauty, its paths winding through shadows where villagers rarely ventured, their tales warning of lights that flickered without source and strangers who appeared only to vanish. Elias, a practical man, dismissed such stories, but he kept a shotgun by the door, a precaution against the wolves that sometimes prowled the woods. One crisp autumn evening, during a time of unrest, when the village buzzed with rumors of strange sightings, a sharp knock echoed through the farmhouse, startling Elias from his supper. The dogs leaped up, barking wildly, their hackles raised as the knock came again. 3 quick raps, then a pause, then 3 more, deliberate and unhurried. Elias set down his spoon, his heart thumping, and glanced at the clock. Just past 9. Far too late for visitors, in a place where night fell heavy and unwelcome. He crossed to the window, peering through the thick glass, and saw 2 figures on the porch under the faint glow of his lantern, an old woman in a tattered shawl, her face lined and pale, and a young boy, perhaps her son, clutching a basket that steamed faintly in the cool air. Cookies, $20. The woman called, her voice thin but piercing, cutting through the dog's barks like a blade. Elias frowned. He hadn't ordered anything, and no one sold goods door to door in Whispering Woods, especially not at night. He checked the security camera he'd installed after a wolf scare, its grainy feed showing the pair clearly. The woman's eyes gleamed unnaturally, like moonlight on still water, and the boy's stare was fixed, unblinking, his hands gripping the basket as if it held something precious. Elias's stomach twisted. Their clothes were wrong, too old-fashioned, like something from a century past, and their faces held a stillness that felt unnatural, as if they were statues brought to life. "We didn't order anything," he called through the door, his voice firm but edged with unease. The woman's smile widened, her teeth glinting like polished stones, and she knocked again, the sound sharper, rattling the doorframe. "Fresh cookies, just for you," she said, her voice now carrying a strange hum, like the buzz of a distant swarm. The dogs growled, backing away, and Elias noticed the air growing cold. Frost creeping up the windows in patterns like swirling nebulas. Despite the fire roaring in the hearth, Elias gripped the shotgun, his hand steady, but his mind racing with village tale stories of cosmic peddlers, beings from beyond who took familiar forms to offer gifts that bound souls to eternal wanderings. The old woman knocked again, her rhythm steady, almost hypnotic, and Elias felt a pull, a whisper in his mind urging him to open the door, to buy the cookies and taste their secrets. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog, and checked the camera again. The basket steamed more now, impossibly so, its contents hidden but glowing faintly, like embers under ash. The boy's eyes seemed to shift, reflecting not the lantern but a deeper light, like stars trapped in glass, and Elias' breath caught, his heart pounding, as if sinking with the knocks. "Go away," he shouted, racking the shotgun, the sound loud enough to startle the dogs into silence. The pair didn't flinch. They just stood there, the woman's smile unchanging, the boy's gaze piercing through the door. The farmhouse felt smaller, its walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of sugar and something sharper, like the temps of a struck meteor. Elias's eyes darted to the walls, where old carvings, simple lines he'd thought were decorative, began to glow faintly, forming patterns like constellations that pulsed with each knock. He remembered a story from his childhood, told by his great-grandfather, a peddler who came to Whispering Woods, offering sweets that left families vanished, their homes marked with star-shaped scratches. Elias had laughed it off, but now, with the knocking growing louder, the carvings brighter, he felt a dread deeper than the wood's shadows. He barred the door with a heavy chair, its legs scraping the floor, and called to the dogs, their growls a small comfort against the rising fear. The woman's voice came again, softer, almost pleading. "Just one cookie. For the road." The boy echoed her, his voice a hollow mimic, and Elias felt the whisper in his mind grow stronger, promising warmth, knowledge, a taste of the infinite. He lit another lantern, its flame flickering as if afraid, and checked the windows, where the frost patterns now formed spirals that hurt his eyes to trace. The dogs whimpered, retreating to the corner, and Elias noticed the floorboards creaking, not from his steps, but from something beneath, as if the earth itself stirred. He grabbed an old family Bible, a relic his great-grandfather swore by, and flipped through it, finding a passage about warding off spirits with salt and iron. He poured a shaky line of salt across the threshold, muttering a prayer, and hung an iron horseshoe above the door, its nails driven deep into the wood. The knocking slowed, each tap deliberate, as if the pair were savoring the weight, knowing Elias's resolve was fraying. The whisper grew clearer, speaking of cosmic markets, where souls were traded for bites of stardust sweets, of joining an eternal caravan that roamed the voids. Elias's vision blurred with flashes, black skies filled with writhing shapes, planets crumbling into light, a darkness that hungered for his warmth. He clutched the shotgun, his hands slick with sweat, and shouted again, "Leave, or I shoot." The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and the boy's eyes on the camera seemed to grow, filling the screen with pinpricks of light, like a galaxy staring back. The basket glowed brighter, its steam curling into shapes that twisted like tentacles. And Elias felt his thoughts unravel, tugged toward a truth too vast for his mind. He cracked the door an inch. The shotgun aimed, and barked, "Show me the cookies." The woman lifted the basket's lid, revealing not baked goods but orbs of light, pulsing and shifting, each one whispering his name in a voice that echoed from nowhere. The boy's smile stretched to wide, his teeth shimmering like shards of a broken star, and Elias slammed the door, his heart racing. The knocking resumed, now from the walls, the roof, even the chimney, as if the pair had multiplied, surrounding the farmhouse. The dogs howled, the lanterns flickered, and the carvings on the walls glowed brighter, forming a map to a place Elias didn't want to know. He grabbed a tin box from under the floorboards, a keepsake from his great-grandfather, and found a note inside. The sellers come from the stars, their gifts a trap. Seal the threshold with faith, or they take all. Elias scratched a symbol from the note onto the door, a star within a circle, and chanted the prayer louder, his voice hoarse. Hours dragged on, the knocking a constant drumbeat, the farmhouse a cage of fear. The frost patterns spread, covering the windows in galactic spirals, and the air hummed with a pulse like a distant heartbeat. Elias stayed in the salt circle, the Bible open, the shotgun ready, his dogs trembling beside him. The whisper promised eternity, a place among the stars. But with each promise came visions of endless voids, where comets screamed and shadows fed. Dawn crept over the woods, the sky lightening to a dull gray, and the knocking stopped, leaving a silence that felt alive, watchful. Elias peered out, the shotgun in hand, and saw the porch, empty, no figures, no footprints, only the basket, sitting alone. Its glow faded, but still steaming faintly. He nudged it with the barrel, and it tipped over, spilling dust that sparkled like crushed stars. Forming a constellation on the ground, Elias burned the basket in the fire pit, the flames flaring blue and green, the smoke curling into shapes that hurt his eyes. The farmhouse returned to quiet, but the carvings stayed faintly lit, visible in the dark, and the air held a hum, like the echo of a cosmic market. He kept the shotgun loaded, the dogs close, and avoided the door, his nights haunted by faint taps in his dreams, whispers of cookies and stars. The villagers noticed his changes haunted eyes, his muttered prayers, and spoke of him as cursed. Touched by the wood's ancient magic, on still nights, when the trees swayed, Elias heard the knocks again. Not from the door, but from within his mind. A reminder that the cookie seller from beyond had left a piece of the void, waiting for him, to take a bite and join their endless caravan. Story number 8, The Window Tapper in the Night in the rolling moors of Grimly Vale, where fog clung to Gothic ruins like a shroud and the wind carried moans from buried pasts. Emily resided in a stone farmhouse that stood alone against a vast, empty landscape. The house, with its weathered walls and steeply pitched roof, was a relic of her family's history, passed down through generations who whispered of the Vale's secrets. Tales of lights that danced in the mist and voices that called from the stars. Emily, a painter in her early 30s, had returned to the farmhouse after a failed career in the city, seeking solace in its quiet isolation to rediscover her art. The front door, heavy oak with iron hinges, was rarely used. Instead, the windows, tall and arched, were her connection to the world, framing the moors in hues of gray and green. She spent her days sketching the landscape, her nights lost in Gothic novels, their stories of haunted estates fueling her imagination. The villagers of Grimly Vale, few and far between, spoke of wanderers who appeared in the fog, their knocks not on doors, but on windows, seeking entry to lives they could never claim. Emily brushed off such tales, her mind focused on her canvases, but she kept a heavy iron candlestick by her bedside, just in case. One foggy evening in late autumn, as Emily sat by her easel under the glow of a single lamp, a faint tap echoed from the window nearest the hearth. The sound was soft, like a fingertip testing the glass, but it cut through the silence of the farmhouse, making her pencil freeze mid-stroke. The fog outside was thick, swallowing the moors in a gray veil. And the tap came again, deliberate, followed by a voice, low and muffled. "Can you hear me?" Emily's heart skipped, her breath catching as she set down her pencil and approached the window, her bare feet cold on the stone floor. She parted the heavy curtains, expecting a lost traveler, or perhaps a branch caught in the wind. but the glass revealed only fog, swirling like a living thing. The tap returned, sharper now, and the voice repeated, "Can you hear me?" with a tone that carried both desperation and an eerie calm, as if the speaker knew she was listening. Emily's pulse quickened. She grabbed the candlestick, its weight grounding her, and leaned closer to the window, squinting into the fog. For a moment, she saw a shadow, a tall, thin figure. Its face pressed close to the glass, eyes like voids that sucked in the lamplight. She gasped, stumbling back, and the figure vanished, as if dissolving into the mist. The tap came again, now from another window, then another, moving around the house in a slow, deliberate circle. Emily's mind raced with the village tales. Wanderers from the stars, lost souls knocked astray by cosmic winds, seeking entry to anchor their ethereal forms in the world of the living. She'd laughed at such stories, but now, with the tapping growing louder, the farmhouse felt like a cage, its walls closing in, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something colder, like the chill of an endless void. She lit every candle in the room, their flames trembling as if afraid, and checked the windows, ensuring each latch was secure. The tapping continued, relentless, each strike syncing with her heartbeat, as if the visitor were tuning itself to her fear. Emily's eyes darted to the walls, where old stone carvings, faint lines she'd thought were masons, marks began to glow faintly, forming patterns like star charts that pulsed with each tap. She remembered a story from Old Man Harrow, the village's unofficial historian, about a farmer who heard taps at his windows and opened one, only to vanish. His home found empty, save for scratches on the glass that formed constellations unknown to any astronomer. Emily's hands shook as she clutched the candlestick, her breath shallow, and she called out, "Who's there? What do you want?" The voice answered, closer now, as if inside the room. "Let me in. I'm cold." The farmhouse groaned, its timbers creaking as if under strain, and the fog pressed against the windows, its swirls forming shapes that looked like faces, hands, eyes. Emily backed to the center of the room, her canvas toppling to the floor, its half-finished painting of the moors now streaked with shadows that seemed to move. She grabbed a journal her grandmother had left, a tattered book filled with notes about Grimly Vale's legends, and flipped through it, finding a passage about window tappers from the stars, entities who knocked to test the veil between worlds, their presence tied to the ancient stones in the moors, where carvings matched those on her walls. The journal warned, "Do not open, for their touch brings madness, their gaze the void." Emily's heart pounded as the tapping grew louder, now a rhythmic drumbeat, shaking the windows until the glass rattled in its frames. She poured a line of salt across the windowsills, a trick from her grandmother's stories, and muttered a prayer, her voice trembling. The tapping paused, and for a moment, silence gripped the farmhouse. But then it resumed, faster, as if angered by her defiance. The voice whispered again, "Can you hear me?" And Emily felt a pull, a whisper in her mind, promising warmth, knowledge, a glimpse of the cosmos beyond the fog. She fought it, clutching the candlestick, and noticed the mirrors in the rumbled, clouded glass, reflecting not her face but alien landscapes, skies of swirling colors and shapes that writhed like living things. The tapping shifted, coming from the ceiling, the floor, even the walls, as if the visitor had slipped into the farmhouse's bones, surrounding her in a chorus of knocks. Emily's thoughts blurred with visions, black voids, where stars screamed, planets crumbling into dust, a darkness that hungered for her light. She ran to the windows, boarding them with planks from her art supplies, hammering nails with frantic strikes, but the tapping followed, each strike a needle in her mind. The journal mentioned a ritual, a way to seal thresholds with iron and words, and Emily, desperate, scratched a symbol from the page onto the nearest window frame with a nail. Chanting a rhyme her grandmother sang to ward off nightmares. The tapping slowed, the voice fading to a murmur, but the air grew heavier, pressing against her chest, and the carvings on the walls glowed brighter, forming a map to a place she didn't want to know. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes' time, twisted in the farmhouse's oppressive air. Emily sat in a circle of candles, the journal open, the candlestick clutched like a lifeline. The tapping became a faint pulse, like a heartbeat fading, but the whisper in her mind grew clearer, speaking of cosmic journeys, of joining the wanderers who roamed the stars, free from the weight of flesh. She fought it, singing old songs too, drowned the voice, but her thoughts filled with images of endless skies, where comets burned and shadows fed. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows, which frosted over with patterns like fractal galaxies, spiraling inward. Emily's sanity frayed, tugged toward a truth too vast to hold, and she felt the farmhouse shift, as if the ground beneath stirred from a long slumber. Dawn broke, the fog thinning to reveal a pale, gray sky, and the tapping stopped, leaving a silence that felt alive, watchful. Emily crept to the window, the candlestick in hand, and peered out. The moors were empty, but the glass bore faint scratches, forming a constellation that matched the carvings on her walls, a map to nowhere. She burned the journal, fearing its secrets, and scattered the salt, but the farmhouse felt changed, its air humming with a faint pulse, like the echo of a distant star. The carvings stayed faintly lit, visible in the dark, and Emily avoided the windows, her paintings abandoned, her nights haunted by faint taps in her dreams, whispers of cold and stars. The villagers noticed her change, her haunted eyes, her whispered chants, and spoke of her as cursed, touched by the moor's ancient magic. On still nights, when the fog rolled in, Emily heard the taps again, not from the windows, but from within her mind, a reminder that the window tapper in the night had left a piece of the void, waiting for her to open a window and let it in.